Hey guys, welcome to our first online lecture on your research paper. This is going to be the best format for me to actually teach while you guys are gone, so be on the lookout for these. I will, of course, post them and they'll show up as an assignment for you to view. So let's kind of dive into talking about your research paper first. If you haven't already gone over and looked at the actual assignment, it is posted on Canvas in the research paper writing module. So make sure you take a look at that so you have a general idea of what we're working with. We're looking 8 to 10 pages, regular section, 10 to 12 pages honor section. So this is a pretty lengthy paper, and we're kind of pulling back on other stuff while we're doing that. We would have been pulling back on other stuff that we were doing. We weren't going to do anything from the textbook and that sort of thing, even if you were here on campus. So we're kind of just trying to pull back and focus on this. And actually, you guys probably, hopefully, have a little bit more internet access when you're at home than you would necessarily at school. So this may actually be a good time for you to be doing some research because you'll have some availability there. So working on this paper, basically, if I just kind of summarized it, there's a research section and then there's kind of an argument section. So your research section is twofold. You're going to be looking at a genre of literature that has appeared at some point in British literary history. It may not have originated with Britain, but it is a genre of literature that has appeared in Britain at some point. And the first thing that you're going to be researching about that genre is its history. Now, that history does not have to be limited to Great Britain. It can be really kind of a world history of that genre, but you should mention how Britain has contributed to the development of that genre historically and when it appeared in Britain and so forth. So there will be some that may have originated in Britain, like the novel of Manners. That begins maybe a little bit before Jane Austen, but really with Jane Austen, and then develops from there. So that's kind of a quintessentially British genre. Whereas like if you're dealing with something like the epic, obviously that has a much older and much longer history than Great Britain. But you would want to mention Great Britain's involvement in that with the epic, both kind of traditionally with like Beowulf, and then authors who have created intentional epics like John Milton in Paradise Lost, or Alfred Lord Tennyson in Idylls of the King. So that would be kind of the historical portion. Then the other portion is you'd be kind of researching a definition of the genre. So what are the characteristics of that genre? What makes that genre what it is? And kind of lining that up and creating a very thorough, full definition that somebody who was reading your paper would be able to say, oh, I now know what a Bildungsroman is. I know what all is involved in that. Or I now know what are the key elements of a Shakespearean tragedy. So that they would have all of those kind of ideas. After you kind of present that, that will be the first and second section of your paper, so kind of the historical development of the genre, and then the characteristics and definition of the genre. And those two things will be kind of the first two sections and the research portion. The third portion won't really require research, but we'll be taking your research and then applying it. So you're going to pick a work that is a British work, a work from England or Ireland or Scotland or any of the parts of Great Britain that you feel embodies and represents that genre at some level. And then you're going to basically take your research and use your research to prove that that work is an example of that genre. So that's the third section. That's really kind of more an argument, literary analysis kind of section, kind of like what you've been doing in some of your other papers for this class already. So you've got three sections. The first two are research, and the last section is an argument section. I will say in reference to the argument section, you could pick a very obvious work, right? Like if you were saying Shakespearean tragedy and Hamlet, right? Obviously, that's not a contentious thing. You can still prove it, right? It is a provable statement. You can prove how Hamlet is a Shakespearean tragedy based on your research. So you could go that route, a very direct route, a very clear route, one that's not going to be highly debatable. Or you could choose something, if you want to set yourself up for a little bit more of a challenge, you could choose something that you might say that this work that is typically classified as something else could be classified as the genre you're talking about. So for example, I have had some students who have done some creative things in the past. One student wrote a paper making an argument that Harry Potter is a novel of manners of the wizarding world. That would be kind of a non-traditional, one that was more debatable, right? I had a student argue that Ivanhoe was an epic, right? Typically, Ivanhoe is historical fiction. That's how people typically classify it. Maybe medieval romance, not typically epic. And so trying to argue that that was an epic. So you could go a slightly more non-traditional route with that. And that could make your paper a little bit more interesting. So that's some of kind of the basics that we're talking about the paper. I'm hoping to have maybe a video conference where we can all get together and talk about your questions about the paper early next week, but certainly feel free to email me or call me if you've got questions in the meantime. So let's dive into some of the basics of research paper writing. I realize some of this will be probably a little bit of review. You probably went over some of this with Mrs. Spies last year. You may recognize the PowerPoint. It's the same one. We use it for high school research paper writing. That's what we've developed kind of as Oakdale. So some of this will be review, and I'll try not to belabor points and take a long time on certain things. That's information you may already know, but it is helpful to review. It's been a year since you've done this. So we are going to review a little bit of some things, and then there will be some things that I'll talk about that are specific to this paper. All right, so first we're just going to look at the steps of the research paper today. So like I said, today we're just looking at basics. In the next couple days, I will be giving you another lecture to look at that talks about sources and citation. And so we'll dive into some of that there, and I'll have some exercises for you to do on citing things and so forth. But today we're just going to look kind of refresher on the basics of the research process. Also how that's going to look a little bit different since we're not doing it at Oakdale. So we're going to have to make some adjustments, and I'll talk a little bit about those. And then we'll talk a little bit about selecting a topic. All right, so obviously the first step is to select your topic. Now, you don't have to select your topic before you begin researching, right? You can actually go to a library. If your local library is open, I know a lot of them are closed right now because of COVID-19, but if your local library is open, you've got a whole lot of sources there. Obviously, you can also go to internet sources as well to begin research. And I would actually suggest that as you have some ideas, maybe more than one, about what you're thinking about, go ahead and do some initial research. Maybe you're not taking notes yet, but you are figuring out how much information is out there about this. Is there enough information about my topic that I can write the paper I'm being asked to write? Am I going to be able to find reliable sources on this information, or are the sources out there kind of sketchy and not really reliable? So do some initial research to see which topics are viable. Look at several that you're interested in, and then begin to narrow that down by doing the process of research. And certainly if you're not certain what topic to select, then email me, call me, we'll have a conversation and talk through maybe what's the best option for you, because maybe it would be a good option, but maybe it's not the best option for you in particular. Once you've done some of that initial research, then you can kind of pin down your topic. Once you pin down your topic, because you're going to have to be doing a lot of research, you really don't want to change. So I'd suggest doing some of that initial research first to figure out what kind of topic you want. And you have several days to do that. I'm asking for your topic submission by Monday. So take that time to do a little bit of research, search some things out and see what you might want to do. Obviously, after you've selected your topic, you have to do the actual work of research, and that involves reading, right? And a lot of people think that research is just skimming. You can skim at some level, but the danger of skimming too much, and you're going to have to skim some, right? You're not going to be able to read every source in great detail. You're going to have to find the sections of your sources that are pertinent and relevant and read those. But if you skim too much, you may actually end up pulling out evidence that doesn't really work and doesn't really support your point when it's looked at in context. So you will have to do some reading of the information, and that's why I say read information rather than just research, right? You will have to read. Again, you'll have to find pertinent sections. If you pick up a book, I'm not expecting you to read the entire book about it, right? Unless it's the book you're evaluating, right? The piece of literature that you're trying to prove fits in that genre. You should have read that text just so you can deal with it thoroughly. But if it's just research sources, I'm not expecting you to have read the entire book or the entire article, but the sections of those books and articles that are relevant to you, you should actually read, because that's going to make sure that your paper doesn't feel forced or disingenuous or like there's holes in your argument, so that you can really get an understanding. And this is really an opportunity for you to really dig into something that is interesting to you. Obviously, there are some parameters, and we're dealing with the world of literature in a literature class, but it does give you the opportunity of something that we've talked about over the course of this year, or maybe something we haven't gotten to yet. You have the opportunity to dig into that and get to know that a little bit more and become somewhat of an expert on that. And so that can be an exciting thing. So read material that's going to help you better understand your topic, and then kind of start to process that information. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this when I talk about taking notes, but your notes on the topic don't just have to be taken directly from the sources. You can take notes that are some of your own thoughts. So let's talk about that here a bit more. All right, so before we get to talking about notes, as you are researching, and keep in mind that these steps to a research process aren't necessarily done in a precise order. Some of them overlap, right? And so some of these are all kind of being done at once. So reading information, researching, developing a thesis, and taking notes all kind of take place at the same time. So while you're researching and taking notes, you're developing a thesis, right? Now, your thesis is going to develop a question that you will prove or answer in your paper. That's what the best research papers do. They don't just simply provide information, but they try to make a point. And so that's where that third section of this paper comes in. That third section is more about that's about that proving, right? The first two sections are just largely information. That third section is, okay, I'm going to prove that according to my research, this work fits into that category or into that genre. And so that's what your question that you're going to prove, and I've kind of done that part of the work for you. I've set that up so that you can focus more on the research and making the actual argument. But your thesis, you're going to have to take that point that you're making, that point that you're proving about that text being an example of that genre of literature, and you're going to have to express that in the form of a thesis that needs to be proven. And so you're going to have to make a thesis statement. Take a look at the sample outline that I have on Canvas, as well as the research paper exemplar. They have examples of thesis statements that have been done for this kind of paper. And so take a look at those so that you can get a little bit of an idea of what a thesis like that might look like. All right, obviously, while you're also researching and developing your thesis and taking notes, you're going to be creating a working works cited list. And so this is just a list of all of the sources that you've been using for your research paper so far. And these are going to be in MLA format. Since we're doing this all digitally, I'm not going to be asking you to keep note cards of your works cited list. You're just going to keep a digital Word document of those. And there are a couple ways to do that, and we're going to talk, when we talk about citation, about proper MLA citation, up-to-date MLA 8, that's the most recent version that they've developed. But I am certainly in favor of you using citation tools as well, things like EasyBib. Sometimes the websites themselves will have a citation. Microsoft Word has a citation function. So if you're in Microsoft Word, you could keep all your sources on there, and that would also make doing in-text citation really easy. That's probably the one I would recommend, is to do it all in Microsoft Word with their citation machine, if that's the program that you're using, because then you can insert your works cited list and your in-text citations very easily. So that would be my recommendation. But you want to start developing that while you are doing your research. So as soon as you decide this is the source that I'm going to use, I'm going to take information from this source, go ahead and create that MLA citation for it, the full citation. It's going to save you a ton of headache and a ton of time later on if you just do it right then and there. I speak from experience on that. I waited and did citations late at one time in college, and I was late with submitting the assignment because I just hadn't given myself enough time to do it. So do it on the front end. Cite the works as soon as you decide that you're going to do that, so that you have a running works cited list. So keep that digitally, and that will be easy to submit and easy to use with your documents if you do that digitally. When we talk about citation, I will be talking about you will actually need to learn how to do it correctly, because the important thing to keep in mind with a citation machine is that it will put it out in the correct format if you put it in correctly. So you have to make sure you know how to put the information into the citation machine correctly. So it's important that you are able to recognize the information and cite it correctly on your own so that you know how to do it correctly with the machine, because the machine will only do what you tell it to do. It's great at formatting and putting in periods and punctuation and italics and doing all of that stuff, but you actually have to be able to identify and put the correct information in order for it to do that. All right, so now we're at taking notes. Obviously, again, all of these things are kind of going on at the same time. You're researching, reading information, you're developing your thesis, you are writing down citations, and you're taking notes. Okay, the phone is ringing. I'm going to pause you guys for a second. It's like the real classroom, and I'll be right back. All right, I'm back, and I realized something while I was gone, is that you guys have no idea how long I've been gone, and I will leave you guys. So let's talk about taking notes. I don't remember exactly where I left you, but I want to go back to something that I mentioned a little bit earlier, which was that taking notes can be both information that you've taken and your own ideas. So as you're reading information, as you're researching, when you write things down, and as you're processing through material and you're reading and it's making you come up with new ideas, it's perfectly okay through that process to have kind of an aha moment and to write down a thought that you have and to note that as your own note. Now, obviously, you don't want your whole paper to be that, and it's not going to be if you're doing the research process correctly. But it's okay to have those kinds of notes as well, to have kind of that moment of discovery and learning through the research process, to have those kind of aha moments while you're researching it, and then to take notes on your own thoughts. That's perfectly acceptable, because you might remember it later, but you might not. And so to write down your own thoughts as part of your notes is perfectly fine. So as you're researching and taking notes, you may be revising your thesis a little bit, and you may be making some adjustments there, and you will still be doing all those other things that we were talking about earlier. So that should be a very fluid, and it should be a very a learning process of some sort for you to be taking notes and then having your own thoughts and kind of making discoveries and putting ideas together. You can take notes too, like if you took a note on some characteristic of the genre that you're studying, and then you go back and you realize, hey, I know where I could find that in the text that I'm talking about. You could take a note from the text that you're going to talk about. So say you're talking about science fiction, and you are doing the time machine, and you read that science fiction talks about theories in scientific terms, and then you're like, hey, I could cite that dinner party conversation that the time traveler has with his friends as an example of this. You could take a note on that, right? Here is this part in the text that I could use to support the idea that this is a science fiction work. So you can take lots of different kinds of notes, and in a few days we're going to talk about different styles of note-taking as far as quotations and paraphrases and summaries and fragments and all that sort of stuff. But they can be stuff from the material, your own ideas, evidence that you're going to use from the text. It can be all of those things. Normally, I have you guys do physical note cards and provide you with 3x5 cards, and I had a whole stack of them here ready to give to you when research time came. But given the situation that we're dealing with right now, that's not going to be the most practical. And so we're going to use a digital resource. Mrs. Wills has actually made up, she's doing this for the juniors, and since she'd already made the resource, I thought we would use it as well. It's a Word document that's a chart that will allow you to type in keywords and the source that you got the note from and the note itself and page number. I've already uploaded that onto the modules page with all the rest of the research paper stuff, so you can go there and check it out. I would download that file and save it to whatever device you're using so that you have it, that you can access it. The reason that we're doing it that way is because one of the keys of notes is being able to sort them by topic or keywords, so that when it comes time to write your paper, you can sort your thoughts so that you can kind of sort those out and apply them to the appropriate place in the paper. So be sure to check that out. That's what we're going to use, and that's what I'm going to ask you to turn in when you have to turn in your notes. I'm going to ask you to turn in that file. So be working on that, and you can use that on the digital source. I will give a word of caution with the digital source. It's going to be really tempting to copy and paste everything. Quotations are good, and you do want some quotations to include in your paper from sources that you've read. Not everything should be paraphrased and summary. You do want quotations, but you don't want all quotations either. I do want to see you processing through and turning some things into paraphrases and some things into summaries and fragments. So don't fall prey to the temptation to just copy and paste a bunch of information from your sources. That will be really tempting in the digital realm. But you need to be filtering it through multiple layers. Copy something as a quotation if you think you're actually going to use those exact words in your paper. But if you're not going to use those exact words, go ahead and start the process of figuring out how you're going to say it in other words, because you're going to need to do that when it comes time for the paper, right? And so go ahead and start that process. Make sure you use keywords so that you can sort your notes effectively, and make sure to note page number and source as well, because you're going to need that information later. So don't skimp on those things. All right, after you have done the research process, that involves crafting a thesis and doing research and reading and shaping and organizing and making a works cited list and revising your thesis. After you've been doing all of that, you're ready to make an outline. And you will see on the assignment that I gave you that there are due dates. You should pay attention to those due dates. You're going to want to make a tentative outline based on your thesis, right? And that could be changed during the writing process. You're not locked into that because the writing process is flexible. And so make an outline tentatively that's a working outline that you can adjust. All right, I've got to get the phone and I'll be right back. All right, we're back again. So anyways, obviously after you're taking notes and you've compiled information, making an outline, a plan for your paper so that you have a good idea. A rough outline has been provided to you with those 3 sections, right? You've got a rough outline lined out for you. So use that basic principle, and I am expecting those 3 sections in that order. But within the sections, that's going to be up to you how to organize that. All right, writing your rough draft. It's pretty self-explanatory once you're taking all that stuff, putting it together, following your outline, making adjustments. I am going to expect you to turn in your outline with each stage of your project, so do make adjustments to your outline as you are writing your rough draft. If things are changing, which is perfectly fine, just make sure that you make some of those adjustments as you're going with your outline and your paper. Make sure they match up and they flow well. So make sure that you do that as you're writing your rough draft, because both with your rough draft and your final draft, I'm going to expect kind of the full product. Cover page, formatting, the outline, and the paper itself. So you're going to need to have everything each stage, so make sure that you're doing that stuff as you start writing your rough draft. All right, proofreading. It's good to proofread because we're putting so much focus on this, and this is your real project for this section. I don't want a haphazard first draft. I say first draft because it's the only other term I could come up with besides rough draft. Rough draft implies that it's rough and that you haven't worked on it and you haven't refined it. And that's not what I'm looking for here. I'm looking for, even with your first draft, that you've put effort and thought and refinement into it. So do some proofreading with the first draft. Do some editing and some revising as well, potentially, although I am going to be commenting on revisions, right? That's what I will be commenting on, is how you can revise your paper and make it better. But certainly go over your paper and try to make it as polished as you can for that first draft. Check your parenthetical documentation. You do need to have citations in that first draft. Do not save that till the final draft. That is an absolute no-no, because you won't remember where everything's supposed to go. You won't remember where you got the information. So while you're writing your first draft, you should be putting parenthetical citations in. Those are those in-text citations. They need to be going in while you're writing that first draft, because if they're not going in, you're not going to remember where you got that information, right? That's going to be a real challenge for you later. Again, speaking from personal experience, don't go there. And just double check plagiarism issues, and we're going to talk in a later lecture about plagiarism and so forth as well. Revising your paper, you're going to get comments back from me. I'm going to give some space there to give myself a week to grade these papers because they're long papers and I'm going to need some of that time. So, but you're going to get comments back from me. Use those comments to make adjustments, to make changes. Remember that revision is re-seeing your paper, seeing your paper in a new light. One of the biggest things, traps that students fall into, is not really being willing to make major changes, because major changes are a lot of work. But that's how you actually produce a better piece of writing. A good writer knows that the product is never as good as it could be. And a good writer is also open to significant revisions, chopping whole sections out, adding whole new sections in, moving whole new sections around. So keep in mind that those big changes are sometimes the thing that can make the biggest impact in your writing. And if you've ever had a paper where you felt like, oh, I got this grade and it went up by like 1% or 2%, chances are that you didn't really take seriously the significant changes that you were asked to make. You may have made the small nitty-gritty adjustments, and those are the easy ones to make, and those are the ones that don't feel like our paper baby has been slaughtered, right? It's the easy thing for us to do. It takes less time. It's the quick thing to do. But it's not the thing that gives us the best result of a paper in the end. And so revising your paper actually means re-seeing it, being able to say, hey, this just totally doesn't work. I'm getting rid of it. But that may mean that I need to do a little more research and add things in. That's part of the research process, and that's part of the writing process in general. Even if it's not a research paper, being able to axe things, add new things in, completely re-see things, reinvent things. That's really what revision is all about. And so when we get to this stage, I'm going to encourage you, be open to actually revising, right? Not just making small little adjustments and changes, but actually doing the work of revision. That's what's going to get you the best results on your paper in the end. Keep in mind as well that the final works cited, once you get everything done and you're submitting your final draft, the final works cited page should only include sources that you actually referenced in your text. Even if you looked at a source in your research process, but maybe you decided not to use it, that source that you looked at but in the end didn't use any information from should not be included on your works cited. Only the ones that actually have parenthetical in-text citations in the paper should be included in your final works cited page. Again, proofread. After you've done some revision, it's important to remember that revising and editing or proofreading are different things, right? They're not the same thing. Revising is actually re-seeing and redoing your paper, looking at it in a new light. Proofreading is fixing the nitty-gritty, the grammar, the punctuation, the mechanics, the way a sentence is worded, the vocabulary. That's kind of a proofreading thing. That's fixing little things, right? That's proofreading and editing. That does need to be done, but that should be done after you've done revising, because revising, you may proofread and then axe a paragraph that you already proofread and fixed. So do revising first and then proofreading. And it's always good. you will have had my eyes look over the paper, but it's always good if there is a possibility to have somebody else's eyes look over that paper. Submitting, right? Okay, obviously, no-brainer. Turn it in on time. This is a huge portion of your grade for this quarter, so don't be late on any stage of this project, right? That's really important. You need to make sure you're on time because this is a significant portion of your grade. We're not doing much else right now, and so your energy and your focus for this class should be on this project, and you need to make sure you're doing things on time because turning it in late will be losing unnecessary percentage on your grade, and I don't want to have to do that to you, and you don't want to have that happen. So make sure you've met all the formatting requirements listed on the syllabus. Hopefully you guys still have that. I will try to post it somewhere on the Canvas page here soon if it's not up there already. But the exemplar for the research paper, so that's in the research paper writing module. There's a research paper exemplar there. That is formatted the way that it should be. You'll notice that the student's name has been removed just so that, you know, if there was any potential embarrassment, there shouldn't be. They got a 97.5. But if there was any potential embarrassment on that paper, their name has been removed from that. That being said, all of the formatting on there is precise and is correct, and so follow that formatting as you're formatting your paper. That's a real practical example. All right, let's talk briefly about selecting your topic. I mentioned a little bit of this earlier, but just wanted to go into it just in a slight bit more detail. So keeping in mind that there are two things you need to consider when selecting your topic for this paper. You want the genre that you're going to be talking about, and you want the work in that genre or style that you're going to evaluate. So when I ask for a topic submission, I'm looking for two things. I want you to submit the genre that you're thinking about, or multiple genres. I've said that on the assignment on Canvas for your topic submission. You can list 2 or 3 things that you're thinking about doing, but then also along with that, or each of them, if you're doing multiple ones, to submit the work that you're thinking about evaluating as an example of that genre or style. So go ahead and start thinking about that. You will notice on the assignment for the research paper is 2 pages. On the second page, I've listed some possible genres that you might consider looking at, but I also have an other slot. So you could choose one of those genres and a book that fits in that genre, or if you have another idea that's not listed there, but that you would be interested in researching, I'm perfectly happy to entertain those, run those by me. And most of the time I'm going to say yes to those because I want you guys to be able to research something that you're interested in. So, all right, that brings us to the conclusion of what we're talking about today. I'm going to have some more lectures coming out in subsequent days. Next one's going to be all about MLA citation and plagiarism and finding good sources. I've already got some resources for finding sources on the module, so you can begin to look at things if you've got some topic ideas and you want to go ahead and get a head start. But we'll be talking about that in the next couple days. So be prepared for that, and be prepared for some citation activities that go along with that. Again, you can use citation machines, but do be prepared that I'm going to be asking you to demonstrate some skill in that, because that's how you actually do it adequately and correctly. All right, hope you guys have a great day. Leave a quick comment for me once you've watched this PowerPoint so that I know that you've seen it and that you've completed the lesson. There's not a particular grade attached to that, but I do want to know that you've actually seen it and completed the lesson so that you've gotten the information you need, because aside from just reviewing some basics, I have given you some specifics on this PowerPoint about how we're doing it this year. So leave a comment below, and I will see you next lecture. All right, bye.